Your product solves a problem that exists only in your head. And you spent months, maybe years, building the perfect solution for an imaginary problem. But we did research, validated with users, tested hypotheses. Yes, I know. And yet you still built something that nobody really needed. Because there is a huge difference between a real problem and an invented one, between latent pain and manufactured pain, between genuine need and a need induced by a poorly asked question. By the way, we've already talked about questions here on our channel. And the worst part is, the problem you invented makes so much sense in your head that you can actually convince users that they have this problem, at least until they start using your product. So today, as always, I'm going to illustrate this with an example of a startup dedicated to creating a product to optimize time management for freelancers. So after 6 months of development, the app looked beautiful, had amazing features, and the initial research came to the following conclusion. Freelancers have trouble organizing their time. The interviews confirmed it. Everyone said they wanted to be more organized, more productive, less chaotic. They launched the product. The first users adopted the concept. Downloads were good. Feedback was positive, but the engagement metrics were strange. People would download it, use it for a week, then drop it, and the investigation revealed something odd. Freelancers didn't have a time management problem, they had a cash flow problem. So the disorganization was actually a symptom, not the cause. So when these freelancers themselves asked, how do we get organized? How can we better organize our time? The real answer they probably had was by getting clients who pay on time so they wouldn't have to take on 5 projects at once, 6 projects at once out of desperation. So the real problem, notice, was financial instability, which led to overload. And then the invented problem was the lack of productivity methodology. So the perfect product was created for the wrong problem. It's like using a GPS to go to a place that doesn't exist. That's basically the analogy. So how do we end up building solutions for imaginary problems? How do we fall into this trap? It's more systematic than it seems. So the first step towards the trap, the first sign that it's a trap, is confusing a symptom with the root cause. So users complain that they forget to use the app. For example, then you add push notifications, reminders, badges, etc., but they still forget because the app doesn't solve anything urgent in their lives. It's just a nice to have disguised as a must-have. So you addressed the symptom and ignored the fact that the product is dispensable. So the second step towards the trap is projecting your own needs. You as a PM, an organized and methodical product manager who loves productivity tools, assume that everyone wants to be like that. But maybe your user actually thrives in chaos, and you're trying to fix something that isn't broken. So sometimes our expectations, our pains are projected as well, right? When we analyze a user's context, we're always using the lens of our own personal bias. And that's very dangerous, especially in startup cases where products are usually built from scratch, where the founder is involved, everything starts small and so on. I think this episode here is it's more geared toward this kind of situation, but that doesn't mean it doesn't also happen in large corporations and really big companies, because we're always building products from scratch in those companies too. So it's important that we don't project our own desires. When developing a product, when thinking about a product, when interviewing the user, when preparing the script, during the interview, and so on. We always have to stay on the outside, right? Observing ourselves, truly impartial in any situation. And then the third step is biased validation, right? So you ask, would you like to be more productive? We talked about this in the last episodes about the right question to ask. So I'm bringing it up again here. Would you like to be more productive? Obviously, everyone is going to answer yes. The wrong question leads to fake validation. It's that simple. It's like asking, do you want to be happier? Just imagine what the answer would be. It's just as obvious. The fourth point is assuming that the current behavior is a problem. So the freelancer works late into the night. Wow, so they need to balance life and work better, right? Maybe they work late until late at night because they like it, because they're more productive then, or because the client's time zone is different. In other words, all these kinds of details need to be analyzed, right? Once again, I bring up once more the issue of context, right? Look at the context. Fifth mistake, right? Heading toward a big trap, is ignoring that people adapt, right? So humans are adaptation machines, folks. If the problem were truly unbearable, a workaround would definitely have already been created, for sure, you know? So the absence of a homemade solution might mean there's no real problem. So that's a good sign. So that you can observe whether it's really a pain point, if it's truly unbearable, if this pain actually exists, first of all, and if it does, what level of pain it is. And finally, you're solving your own problem, not the user's. When you think about all these steps I mentioned regarding heading toward a trap, if you notice you're solving your own problem and not the user's, in other words, you're addressing a completely biased problem. So your need to build something useful created an artificial problem to justify a solution you wanted to make, that your team wanted to make, that someone believed in, and so on. So how do we distinguish between real problems and things made up in your head? So I have a few suggestions here. I'm not just bringing problems, I'll bring some suggestions too. The first one is observe before you ask, you know? If possible, guys, follow the user for a week without interfering. What they actually do versus what they say they do. So behavior is more important than opinion. That's a rule. I think that should be written on a little sign on your desk. Behavior is more important than opinion. The second tip is look for problems that generate real costs. So like lost money, wasted time, missed opportunities. Because if the problem doesn't cost anything tangible, it might just be aesthetic frustration and not real pain. So that's an interesting point to pay attention to. The third tip is test the problem without a solution. What does that mean? If people have lived for decades without solving this, why has it suddenly become urgent now? Maybe it's because you planted the seed of dissatisfaction. So that's a very interesting point to observe, you know? If humanity has made it this far without solving this problem and everything's fine, everyone is happy, why has it suddenly out of nowhere become urgent? I think we also need to think philosophically when thinking about developing a product, you know? Fourth tip, right? Fourth suggestion, identify the existing workarounds, right? So if there isn't a workaround, guys, then there isn't a problem, right? Basically, it's rare for that not to be the case, okay? So if the workaround works well, maybe the problem isn't as critical as it seems, you know? Or perhaps they are so accustomed to that particular workaround, to that specific situation, that they already, with that temporary band-aid solution they've already meticulously put in place to effectively solve their immediate problem, you will undoubtedly encounter another significant challenge, which is truly to make absolutely sure they do not, to make sure they actually let go of that workaround and move towards your product, start using your product, okay? And then a fifth suggestion is to apply a real urgency test, you know? Ask the question just to understand, right? This isn't the only question you should ask, obviously, but after you've already explored several situations, several questions, you ask the following question: if I offered the solution for free today, would you drop everything to implement it? This question is truly revealing, because if the answer is when I have time, we'll talk, I'll call you, maybe when things are calmer, we'll talk so I can test out your solution. If that's the answer, it means the problem isn't urgent enough. And then there's also that point. critically analyze what I'm saying, adapt it to your situation, to your context, It's not that not everything fits here, right? Obviously. The sixth suggestion is measure the pain versus the effort of change. Because sometimes the problem exists, but the effort to adopt this new solution is greater than the benefit of solving the problem, It's like giving birth to change management, Shed light on the issue of change a lot at the point of product adoption, Use techniques depending on your product. If it's a B2B product, definitely, okay? Now, if it's a B2C product, there are and techniques, approaches that are also used in B2B market, which are adaptable for the moment of adoption for the B2C market. So this is interesting to keep on our radar. How do I really, if the effort to adopt this new solution is greater than the benefit of solving the problem, we will need to put more effort into this issue of change, right? Rethink that because it could be offensive, This can really be a detriment to your strategy. And the last one is, does the problem persist when you remove your influence? What do I mean by this, If you stop talking about it, do people still, will they keep complaining? Will they complain spontaneously? Because if people don't complain spontaneously when you step away, that's also a sign. It's a sign that maybe there isn't really a problem. And yes, they were being influenced by your approach, by your narrative, by the sheer charm and captivating nature of your pitch. So this is another sign for you to watch for to see if you're on the right track. And if you had never talked to your users about this problem, would they have discovered on their own that they had this problem? So that's the kind of question that needs to be asked as well. Super interesting, And what if the answer is no? Maybe you're in the business of creating problems just to sell solutions. It's as simple as that. If the answer is yes, but they haven't done anything about it for years, maybe the real problem isn't what you think it is. Because at the end of the day, real problems hurt even without you having to poke at them. And real pain leads to real behaviors, not just answers in surveys. So that's a very important point, very interesting, Something we need to pay attention to as product professionals, okay? That real pain leads to real behaviors, not just answers in surveys. So keep an eye on that. That's all for today. Thank you. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.